Hello and welcome to the Claret Blue podcast, sponsored by NordVPN. All the information you need for Nord is in the description down below, including a tasty discount code. I'm your host for this one, Dan Rowlandson, joined by Rob Warner in my home. Welcome, Rob.
Hello, mate. It's a pleasure to be here in Casa Rowlandson.
How you doing? You all right?
I'm all right, thanks, mate. Yeah, very good.
Good. We're here today to talk kit, your speciality. We've got in front of us the Aston Villa new Replica kit and the Pro kit, or the authentic kit, or whatever the tagline is. And I'm going to get you basically for the first half of this video to just go through them, show me what the different materials are, really kind of geek out on the details, and give people at home a little bit of a comparison almost of which one should I buy, which is better, which is value for money, etc. And then in the second half of this video, we've got audience questions as well about all things kit. Home kit then, but everything we talk about here in terms of the details on materials and stuff is going to be the same across the home, away and the third. It's obviously just a design difference for the colours and whatnot. So I'm going to kind of hand over to you and I'll butt in with any questions. You give me a kit breakdown of these.
Apt phrase. If you haven't seen the kit breakdown, do have a look on YouTube.
There'll be a link in the description, mate, for that.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. So this is the first time I've had my hands on these shirts. I live up north now and not particularly near a JD Sports, so I've not had the opportunity to get my hands on it. I've only really seen the pictures. That said, I did go down to London the week of the launch and saw the new Adidas shirts for all the other club teams, so I had a pretty good idea of what we were going to get.
Well, they didn't have Villas at the time.
They did not. It was a couple of days before we launched it. So
this is my dad's, by the way, who's let me borrow it. So the only time I've seen it in the flesh is this is my dad's one.
So I can't do what I'd normally do on the kit breakdown and start snapping seams and things.
Not unless you're going to send an invoice afterwards.
Well, I mean, if it snaps, then we should send it back anyway. But no. So first look at it, and I've not taken a look off camera either. I mean, it's got all the hallmarks I would expect of a replica shirt, and in that, something that people would talk about within the industry is perceived value. Right. So a lot of questions that I get as a kit designer is, well, why is the crest different on the replica shirt compared to the Pro shirt? And a lot of it comes down to what the fans see as being valuable. Right. So a great example of that is the 3 stripes on the shirt here, where obviously that's a fabric tape that's been stitched on with a what we would call a twin needle machine. Gives you quite a nice little detail on the inside, albeit that's just kind of an accidental detail. But yeah, they're stitched on because fans would typically see more value in something that they feel has been constructed. Yeah. A lot of fans would talk about things that are heat applied as being stickers. Yes. And so, you know, the reality is that quite often the stickers are more expensive than the things that are stitched in. But we'll get onto that when we get to the authentic shirt. Yeah. The collar is really nice. They've used a really good quality of rib here on this collar. So I really like that we've got the claret and blue stripes, which, if you remember, when the club launched the new crest and the typeface, and one of the things they called out was the multiple stripes that we've had on collars over the years, and that was why we ended up with a double outline on the crest. So it's great to see some connected thinking, and they've brought that into the collar. It is a really nice rib, which is usually a good opportunity for a brand to cheap out and use rubbish rib that doesn't feel nice against your neck. So again, just a hallmark of a good brand doing their jobs properly. Yeah. I think the fabric itself is quite heavy, robust. This will last well for a replica shirt and for your average fan. It's I wouldn't say it was a particularly expensive fabric. It doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of stretch in it, but it's definitely, you know, it's built to last. It feels quite nice and soft, so that's a good material. The 3 stripes are embroidered onto the shirt, so that means there's literally a machine that's got a needle that's pushing that in and creating it. Something I'm not usually a fan of, and something the athletes definitely aren't, because obviously then that comes through to the other side. Yeah. So if you're John McGinn and running the London Marathon over the course of 90 minutes or whatever he manages to cover, that can get pretty uncomfortable, either rubbing on your freshly waxed chest or nipple, depending on the placement. And any runners will know that nipple rub is a real thing with either bad fabric or badly placed logos, etc. The way that they've applied the crest, though, is what we would call an applique. So you get a lot of French terms in the fashion industry, but that's where this badge itself would be woven on, similar to an embroidery machine, but it's actually woven onto a backer material, and that's how you can get the nice definition that we've got, the really sharp edges that you wouldn't get with an embroidery. And then they use an embroidery machine around the outside to apply that. Again, I think the attention to detail that they've used is talking about that double outline, or kind of a triple outline really, looking at it, is they've embroidered both the sky blue and the claret around the outside, which just adds another bit of richness and a bit more perceived value, and it does add a little bit more cost in terms of construction. Trade Nation logo, not a massive fan of it, particularly because it's orange. Don't really know what they do. Presume it's something to do with foreign exchange or something like that.
Sign of a great sponsor, isn't it, that neither of us know what
Yeah, exactly, whatever. And then the AV 150 on the back, which it's nicely executed, but I think for me, as a logo itself, I don't love it. I think as a Villa fan who knows it's the 150th anniversary, I'll get it. But if I didn't, I don't know if I'd be able to read that. It kind of looks like it might say A1500. So as much as the brand are talking about the beautiful calligraphy, etc., it just lacks that fairly obvious punch. I think I would have liked to have seen something a bit closer to when we had William McGregor on the back of the shirt, that perhaps had a bit more of a story to tell. Last bits to talk about would be, I guess, materials as a whole. It's good that we've got a variety of fabrics. Looks like we've got 3 different across here. I think the sleeve and the main body are the same. Looks like we've got a slightly different mesh for the insert panel, and then a much more lightweight performance, probably more expensive one here across the lower back, which is obviously the area that a player can get quite damp if the shirt's tucked in, so that's why you'd use a mesh there. Done a nice job of something that's we've not seen done very well on Villa shirts over the years, which is colour matching. So if we look at the kind of the clarets, and I don't know how well it'll show up on camera, to get the tape to match with the main body fabric is no small feat. It does take a lot of work to get that right. And then just having these 2 different fabrics here as well, which there appears to be a slight difference, probably just because of what the fabric's made from, but to be able to get that consistency and have it feel like one shirt in one proper colour palette, again, it takes a bit of work. From an overall design perspective, the main thing that I really like is that we've all resisted the urge, be that the club and the brand, of having these contrasted inserts that we've seen on the other teams. I think
it's the same for the shorts, isn't it, as well, not having that colour strip on the back.
And I think if it had been year 2 or year 3 of the relationship, we might have seen that as bringing something different to the party.
So like a blue down here, you're talking about?
Or even, like a yellow or a gold, could have been all sorts. I'm sure there were things they could have played with, but year 1 of a relationship, you don't tend to need to do anything crazy. So if we then move on to the authentic shirt or pro shirt, this is a medium, so that is kind of the difference in the sizing, not necessarily the fit. I think with this, we straight away can see and feel
so different,
loads of different details. And I think it's interesting that I've seen people talk about with, they shouldn't make a pro shirt, or shouldn't sell it, and shouldn't be so expensive. Having worked in the industry and on pro level shirts, to a certain extent, you don't really worry about the cost, because it's doing what's right for the athlete. Ultimately, and I'll use John McGinn as the example, because he sweats a lot. If we were to put him in that shirt over the course of 90 minutes, he'd absolutely notice the difference. His performance would tail off as he goes through the game, because obviously he wouldn't be able to regulate his body temperature. So straight away with this one, we can feel the difference in the way it's really beautifully put together. The difference in the neckline here, where we've got self-coloured rib on the front, whereas this one has got a self-fabric tape on the front. So they've literally taken some of the main body fabric and stitched it in to give that really neat finish. We've still got the rib on it. It's a slightly different rib in the way it's put together. Let me see if it is what I think it is. Yeah, so that is, I think, a flat knit rib, which is where it's literally all comes off in one piece. So's that one. I am geeking out here. So with a lot of brands, and something you would be familiar with yourself on, like a track jacket is the easiest way to see it, is where the rib is knitted in a tube and then it gets cut and folded in half, so you get 2 layers.
Yeah.
Whereas Adidas over the last few seasons on the football shirts have worked with a much more expensive version, which is a flat knit, where it literally just comes off as a strip.
Right, yeah.
So it's much more expensive to produce. And reduces the weight and bulk around the collar. This one's got a little bit of kind of mesh detail in those stripes, which again just makes it a bit more breathable. I've been asked loads of times, both in terms of the national shirts and the club team shirts, what this is for on the back of the neck. My best guess would be that it's to kind of help hold the fabric away from the neck, because that is an area that wouldn't really affect performance from a physiological perspective, but in terms of the comfort of the player, anything that's a distraction and they're having to pull the collar away. Anybody that's watched tennis over the years and seen Rafa Nadal constantly pulling his shorts out of his bum, you know, that's a distraction. And so, although for him it might just be a
routine.
Yeah, routine, exactly. But for a player, an athlete, they really want as few distractions as possible. Another difference that seems to be with this shirt is there is a little bit more texture to the material, only a little bit, not as much compared to some of the other Adidas performance shirts for the club teams. We did see within the Euros that there was a lot of the Adidas shirts were wetting out and sticking to the body, whereas this, I would hope and expect that it would be a little bit less of an issue just because of the material. The main material difference is going to be the mesh at the sides, which has got this, what we call a jacquard, where you knit a pattern straight into it. So it's got the jacquard stripe running through the back panel. It's also got a drop shape to the hem, so a little bit longer to the back than it is to the front. Quite an expensive way of putting it together as well. So just cuts away excess fabric, but still keeps the back covered, because obviously as players bend over, lean forward, whether they're sprinting or picking the ball up for a throw-in, they need that extra coverage.
Yeah.
Last 2 main differences that are really obvious. First of all, on the stripes, so they are heat applied. But again, where you see the difference with Adidas and the attention to detail that they've become really known for the last few years is through, you can see the texture detail on the stripes there. So rather than it just being a flat 3 stripes, it's really got some value to it. And then similarly with the Adidas branding, you can see heat applied, so no distractions for the player on the back. It's really soft and supple.
Does this still like a plasticky texture then? It's not like a stitching on top of it?
There's no stitching, that's purely just, they've built that into the design, and that's a texture that's been put into the mould for the transfer. So yeah, you know, the fact that they've done that is really, really nice, and to be able to achieve it on something that's so malleable is great. And then the use another French phrase, the pièce de résistance would be would be what they've done with the crest. And this is my first look at this, and it looks absolutely stunning, and is absolutely stunning. You've got the texture as if it's a direct embroidery. Then the Aston Villa and the 1874 are raised above the rest of the crest. It's kind of a rope type stitch detail around the outside edge. Absolutely stunning. So in terms of the price difference for the two, honestly, as a fan, as a dad, and as somebody that works in the industry, it's hard to justify the price point on the replica shirt. Ideal world, 65 quid, something like that, for a shirt like this with, I know we can all go onto dodgy foreign websites and buy snide shirts. There's a million reasons why we shouldn't do that. But a shirt isn't just the cost of its constituent parts. There's the cost of the relationship, the cost of the research, the cost of the designers of getting it to fit properly, of getting it to last, all those things that the counterfeiters don't have to use.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not really fair to say, well, they're cheap to make, because they're not cheap to make anyway. But yeah, it still feels like the prices are a bit too inflated. In terms of this one, I can get it. It feels more value for money in the eyes of a professional.
Yeah.
I think it's more expensive material. It's got much more manufacturing detail. that badge in itself would be at least double the price of the one that's on the replica shirt. Yeah, because all these little technologies, the machinery that brings in the textures, you know, they've not cheaped out on the stripes or anything. So there's a really big step up in terms of difference. So I would say if you can afford the pro shirt, you know, if you're shopping in a world where money's no object, or you really want to treat yourself, I would go for that one. And I think for me, that'll be the one that I'll buy. The replica is still really good as replica shirts go. The price is the price across most of the industry now.
Yeah.
And I think compared to plenty of other teams, this is a far better replica shirt than we'd get. So better value for money than most replicas, but still 80 quid. I feel like brands need to start taking it a bit more seriously, the financial pressure that fans are under.
Agreed. We'll go through some questions in a sec, just a couple for myself first. There's obviously differences here when we've got them in front of us, that this is an extra large or 2XL, this is a medium, so they're obviously not comparable in terms of the sizing. You say about this being a different quality to this and that kind of that perceived value. As a fan, I'm thinking, I'm sure others will be thinking, well, this is less likely to come off in the wash, so I'm paying more for this one and it's better, but what if this does peel off? Is that likely? Is that still possible?
It depends how you care for it. I mean, the reality is that for an athlete, this might get worn for 90 minutes, more likely 45. I think the days of, certainly with some of the bigger clubs I've worked with over the years, you know, the days of these being banged in the wash and then coming back out again. The training kit does, but the match shirts tend to be kind of one and done. That said, they'll still be made to Adidas's standards, so they'll still be expected to meet so many washes at so many degrees. I would expect, there we go, nice big booklet of care instructions. Inside it's a legal requirement that it's in every single language for the markets that it's being sold in. So so that's why you end up with a big book of it. Also interesting to note that the UK Adidas office is literally across the road from where I live. So if ever you want to come and track me down because you don't like me, there's a little clerk just doxed myself live on Claret and Blue. Yeah, so it's really taking care of it. So don't put it in with fabric softener. You shouldn't need to. These days with the way that detergents are, you don't need to wash anything really above 30 degrees, which is good for the environment, it's good for your electric bill, and it's good for your clothes. So yeah, it should last. I think if you are going to be washing it loads, you're going to be wearing it a lot, smoking in it, getting curry down it, you know, whatever else people's own match day routine is, then I would say the replica's going to be more robust from that perspective. So yeah, I think if you know that it's going to be coming in for a bit of rough and tumble, even if you're going to be wearing it for 5-a-side every week, you know, you might want to get the one that's probably cost you less and a bit more built to last, really.
Before we get into the questions then, which are very technical, some of them which I appreciate, what about like the design of the shirt? As you said, it's the first iteration with Adidas that it tends to be quite, not simple, but not taking any risks with colours and whatnot. Just talk me through the different badge, the stripes, the sponsor, how that all kind of comes together, because again, sponsors shouldn't be important, and forget the fact about it, your kind of stance on betting companies and stuff. If this was bright purple or green, that would massively kill everything. The fact it's white and quite simple helps, for me, the design look nicer. What are your thoughts as an expert?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think with, when you're designing shirts, you always hope that you're going to know what the sponsor is. A good example from my own history was working with Lazio in the mid-2000s, where they were always Siemens Mobile for years, and so we designed the shirts with that in mind. Siemens were pretty flexible. They were just up the road from the Puma office. They'd come down and approve the sponsor logo, etc. And then the one season, the Siemens deal ended. I think it was fairly suddenly. It was a bit unexpected. We designed it with Siemens on, but I did a shirt that I thought was great. It was black. It got electric blue detail on it. Looked really nice, and then it showed up at the kit launch, and it had got a new sponsor logo on it. There was a company called Parma Cotto, which is like a centuries old Parma ham company.
I was going to say Parma ham as a guess.
Yeah, and their
silly.
their logo is mustard yellow and maroon, and it was on the front of this black shirt, and it just looked dreadful. Some brands are quite precious about what you can and can't do. Sometimes for cultural reasons. So working with Everton, when they had Chang on the shirt, there were certain colours of sponsor logo we couldn't use because they represented death or bad luck.
Right, okay.
Within Thailand, something that could be interesting from a Villa perspective going forward is that I believe green's an unlucky colour in Egypt.
Right.
So with obviously Nassef's involvement in Adidas and Villa, it might be that we don't see green away kits for a while, if at all. But yeah, so I think with Betano, I think for them, they seem quite happy to have just had whatever colour.
So I think they have got an orange, haven't they, or like a red maybe in the logo.
Personally, I think it is a better reflection of the brand if it's got a colour that suits the shirt rather than that it sticks out like a sore thumb. If we all remember the Man City kit from a few years ago that had a tiny little Etihad underneath the club badge because it had a sash across it, and that got so much kind of talking about, so much PR, just because of that, rather than it would have ruined the shirt if they put it across the stripe. So yeah, it does make a big difference. I know we've talked a lot in the past about why a Villa shirt's late every season, whatever late constitutes, because unlike Christmas, there isn't actually a set date for shirts to be launched every summer. As a kit designer, it can depend on if you're getting the brief late, like Adidas would have done this time, and late means less than 18 months before launch date.
Yeah.
Then straight away you're on the back foot. If the sponsor logo or the sponsor deal is signed late, that can make a difference because you've got to figure out, is the logo going to be applied at the factory, in the warehouse when it gets back across to Birmingham or wherever they're being held. And it all just adds time to the launch date.
If you change your club crest for the millionth time in
and the crest years, as well, yeah. So it was the perfect storm with this one, that it was a new crest, a new sponsor, and a new manufacturer. So I think to even get a shirt out in time for most of the pre-season friendlies was an achievement in itself. You could, to the untrained eye, you could make a pretty good argument that is a better embroidery than that one. Well, but that's not an embroidery.
Yeah, my initial thinking was that it looks like it's supposed to be stitched, so I thought there was some kind of actual material here, and then the reverse side would have been like a heat transfer. So it's really nicely done.
Yeah, so now there's plenty of different ways of doing some of these things, but they've obviously worked really hard. The artwork itself, somebody's had to sit there and draw on all of those stitches to get that right. So again, there, when you think about what goes into why a shirt is so expensive, it's part of it's the time of a designer to sit and do those things.
We've got audience questions next. These are in no particular order. So we'll start with avillafan.com, who says, in Rob's opinion, does he think, despite rising kit costs, the general standard and quality of kits has dropped? It's an interesting take.
Yeah, it is. I would say, honestly, across the board, I don't think kits are as inventive as they used to be. Right. And I know that fans, and I want to make sure I don't come across as an old man shouting at a cloud here, but yeah, I feel like in the early to mid 2000s, the noughties, there was a big shift in what kits were from a performance perspective.
Yeah.
And not just ones that I was fortunate to work on at Puma, but what Adidas were doing, what Nike were doing. There was 2-layer shirts, there was aerodynamics were brought into it, and there was a real thing to try and improve the athletic experience, really. Whereas the shift more recently, and I know it's a trend thing, has been to look back at old shirts and it reminds me of that classic detail, and I get it, but sometimes they're a bit too route one, a bit too obvious. So, the phrase I've used a few times is, if Sam Allardyce designed a football shirt, that's what you'd get. It'd just be like a proper football shirt, and it's not really that thoughtful. I think Adidas have done a great job, and I'm not just saying that because they're doing our kits. You can watch other things where I've talked about them as a brand before. I think they make such an effort in terms of attention to detail. The graphics are usually really strong.
Talk to me about this drop shadow then. I'm quite torn on it from kind of like a Photoshop perspective. A drop shadow is like a very basic effect, and I think if it was like a more blurred outline, you kind of get away with it being more subtle. The fact that it looks it's just like copied and pasted the line and then dragged over looks cheap, but having seen it on the shirt, and especially from kind of far away, if someone's wearing it, it doesn't look terrible. But I think there's a massive difference between how the badge looks in person and digitally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw it hanging up earlier before we started recording, and from a distance it does look not a stupid distance, so you can't see it, but from maybe like 10 or 12 feet away it looks quite nice. The lion does stand off the shirt, which is a really nice feature. But yeah, I just wonder if there were other ways that could have been achieved. And like you say, in terms of how it shows up, particularly on the pro shirt, on the badge, it's executed really nicely. I think you can look at it and say,
done well,
yeah,
it's
nice.
Well, it's just a strange choice.
Well, because it's super crisp as well on that execution. Now it's good on the woven badge, but it's very clear that it's just part of the woven badge, whereas it's a bit more of a believable kind of shadow, a bit of a believable depth on this one. So I think I said at the time when the new crest was launched, it's got, for me, all the right elements, just not necessarily in the right places. So I would have had the star up above the badge and done it properly and not have it included, for two reasons. First of all, having it in there as a permanent fixture is almost conceding that we won't win it again. You know, if we do win it again, or when we win it again, where's it going to go? Which was a real thing that I experienced designing the Italy kit in 2006. There was a brand agency went off and came up with a new badge for them that had got the 3 World Cup stars built into it, and then within 6 months they'd won the World Cup. And we had to make a load of shirts, and the ones with 3 stars on were obsolete. So, you know, there's a problem around that. In terms of the drop shadow, again, itself works well on a shirt, but in terms of digital media and stuff, it does feel a little bit cheap and, like you say, a bit photoshoppy, really. I just wonder if there was a better way they could have done that, even with using a slightly different coloured outline around the lion, you know, like a really thin, proper gold, or, you know, there must have been something else that could have been used.
More texture or detail.
Yeah, and I think when you're designing a badge, and I've done a couple for clubs in the past, you do have to try and think about all the places it's going to show up, from an avatar on Twitter to a business card to the side of a stadium. So it's at loads of different scales, so it's not an easy job. And then you have to think about the different colour backgrounds it's going to show up on.
Right, James asked, and this was probably the most common question, and I've seen on social media a lot. Why were the shop asking where the customer wants the Champions League badge for the first week on sale? Middle of the sleeve or middle of the Adidas stripes? This seems a pretty basic thing to have organised beforehand, or is it governed outside of Villa's control?
Good question.
So my dad has got the Champions League badges, obviously, as most people probably are going to get.
And he has taken what I believe to be the correct choice of having it in the middle of the stripes, because it just looks more balanced. So
the stripes aren't middle of the sleeve?
The stripes aren't middle of the sleeve. So if I fold this up correctly, and as I've been manipulating these on the desk in front of us, if you lay this completely flat, which you can't because of the Champions League badge, so we use this sleeve, you've actually got 2 stripes to the front and 1 stripe to the back.
Right, yeah.
And that's really because the way that you wear the shirt, it will look more even and sit more naturally.
Yeah.
And that's the same with pretty much anything that you own that's got a stripe over the shoulder like that. If it's from a decent brand, the chances are it'll be slightly to the front.
Right.
And so I would think the reason why they're asking the question for the fans is...
Should it be a choice, though?
Well, I would think there's a risk that fans would complain that it's not in the middle. So it is, clearly, if you look at it there, but if you look at it like that, it's not in the middle.
Yeah.
And people can and will find anything to complain about.
I think it looks so much worse if it's not central to the
Oh,
stripes.
totally. For me, if you do get asked that question, it's got to sit there, and then it should be quite central on your arm as you wear it. Yeah. But yeah, quite why the question was asked, I can only think it's that because as Brummies, we all like a moan. And I can imagine there'll be some people saying, well, that's not in the middle when
But
it
you
gets
would like to
handed
think
back across.
it was like a protocol thing that Adidas say that any kind of sleeve printing, like with the sponsor on the other side, we always want it central to the stripe.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is Adidas can only really give a guidance because
Yeah,
obviously the Champions League logo, as much as they, were heavily involved in the tournament, it's kind of beyond their remit. So, in the same way that to a certain extent with where the sponsor logo goes as well, there's a typical position for it, but depending on how much the sponsor has paid, they can have a little bit of a say as to exactly what size and exactly what position, because you've got kind of zones where these things can go.
Yeah.
I think we've seen, I forget which season it was, and it may have been an Adidas kit, where sometimes the logos have been really quite close to the front, moved further round, just because of the details on a shirt.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's kind of not really under anybody's control where it goes. It is kind of customer preference.
Okay.
Adidas kitting out the players will absolutely put it where it needs to be.
Yeah.
But as a consumer, it's you're customising something you're buying. So you could have it there if you want.
This is my dad's shirt specifically, but this is a thing that I've seen on Twitter. Can you see like the kind of outline of a rectangle in the middle here that looks like some kind of press? Or am I losing my mind a little bit?
I can't see it.
Is that an error? Is that a fault? It looks like a heat press thing.
Yeah, it does look like a heat press. I think because you sent me a picture of it beforehand to check, and I wasn't sure if maybe it was related to how it had been folded up in the bag.
These look like the fold lines, don't they?
Yeah, which, because you've got definite corners to it there. Yeah. I would honestly expect, looking at it like that, I'd expect them to just come out after one wash.
Okay.
The reality with heat pressing things, to nerd out on the details again, is that there's three things that a good factory has to take into account. So there's the temperature, there's the pressure, and the time.
Right.
So it's not just a case of heat press, pull it down like making a panini. It is like whoever's created this as a heat transfer. So it comes on the backing foil, as you will have seen, having your Champions League crests applied, and then it goes on the shirt, gets positioned, and then there'll be a temperature that's given as a guideline by the people that have made the transfer. Right. Yeah, so it might be like 180 degrees at however many bars of pressure and 6 seconds or whatever it might be. And that will also depend on the base fabric, the colour of the base fabric, because too much heat can make the colour bleed through into the transfer. It's quite
very technical.
Yeah, it is much more technical than you'd expect, to be honest.
So for anyone else who's got a shirt similar to this,
yeah, if you can see the lines on that.
If that doesn't come out in the wash, then what?
If it doesn't, then I would say, you're within your rights to take it back. I would say, because if it doesn't come out, I would class that as a manufacturing defect.
Is it on this one?
Yeah, I did notice. I think something similar on the authentic shirt. Yeah, you can see there a little bit, maybe fold lines on it, but either way, there's very clear creases and corners to it. So yeah, I would say it's going to be related to that. And again, I would expect it will come out in the wash or even after being worn for a few hours, depending how bad it is.
30 degrees, no fabric softener, get it in the wash.
Yeah. Don't tumble dry it.
Okay, all right, let's move on to more questions then. Adam and Butterbeams, I'm going to do in one go here. Adam first of all says, this is probably a whole separate video, if Rob was designing a special 150 anniversary kit, what Aston Villa details, past or present, would he incorporate into a design to represent the club's history? And Butterbeams says, apart from claret and blue colours, what does Rob think is essential for a Villa kit?
I think there's a lot that Adidas have done right here. I think even just the multiple little stripes on the collar feels very Villa. I remember first seeing the shirt and thinking, doesn't look like a West Ham shirt, that's a relief. So that was a big factor. I think I would look to see what other nods I could bring in, but perhaps make them more subtle. So in the same way that in the club shop there's going to be a brick statue, isn't there, that's got the names of all the club captains engraved onto it. So I kind of wonder if there would have been an opportunity to commemorate something like that.
Yeah.
Or if you remember when we had the Nike shirts a few years ago and it had got Pride of Birmingham inside behind the crest.
Little touches like that.
Yeah, might have been something. I think for me it would have been in the details. Ultimately, it's got to stand out as being a proper Villa shirt first and foremost, and then you get into it like the video was, where you've got the traffic cone going across the road. There'd be those little bits that
traffic cone, little
exactly. Put a little traffic cone on it. So I would have looked to bring some of those bits in. The other thing I would have done would probably have been with an away shirt. The temptation would have been there to look at 1982 and do a white one with the claret stripes down it, but for me, I would have perhaps looked at that as an inspiration or a way of adapting it, but done something really forward thinking, really super modern, because the very fact that we were founded by William McGregor, the very fact that he founded the Football League, the very fact that if it hadn't been for the First World War, Villa Park would have been the biggest football stadium in the world. We were pioneers of the game back in that era, and that was part of why I wasn't an advocate of us going back to the round badge. I wanted us to do something completely different and be pioneers again. And I think for the 150th anniversary, that would have been a real quality of the club to espouse, of like, what can we do that's going to be radically different? So even, taking away the fact that working for a brand you have to have templates, etc., I think I would have looked at something radical like, are there a range of shirts that suit different playing styles? So one's heavier, one's tighter, one's a slightly different material. Look at the different players in the same way that the players wear different boots, Predators, Mercurial. Yeah, literally. So they'd look the same, but put every player in a different shirt depending on either their position or playing style, exactly like you do with boots. No brand's ever done it.
So, like, for example, a striker more likely to get their shirt pulled, so they wear something tighter.
Exactly. Or that's harder to pull. A defender might want something that's a bit more rugged. Emi Martinez might want something where he can lift the shirt up and it's got a mask of something horrible to taunt the opposition supporters with. I don't know, but I'd look for what would be the ways that people would go, oh wow, and it'd be something that William McGregor, if he was looking down on us from up above, would nod his head and approve.
Nice. Okay. What about the colours? Just quickly, does this feel like the right claret and blue to you? It's very different to even last year's.
It's pretty close. Pretty close. I wouldn't be surprised to see it perhaps change again with a bit more time going into next season.
I do like it being darker. It's much darker than last year.
It feels much more in keeping with where I would want the club to be at. I know everybody's got their own opinions, partly depending on when they started supporting the club. But I would think perhaps season one for Adidas, they've got as close as they possibly can, depending on what remit they've been given from the club and how much time and all that jazz. But I would think going into season 2 and beyond, I would expect us, whether it's this one or maybe a slightly different one, they might choose to perfect it, that we would then see that coming year on year on year then.
I thought we could do another video another time looking at home shirts of the last, 30 years or whatever, because they're very different. I've got a couple upstairs, but not enough to do it now. But if you get 30 shirts of Aston Villa over the last, for like the Premier League era side, there's so much variation in the claret when you would think it should be, well, that's Villa claret, like that's a brand in itself kind of thing. And hopefully Adidas are the manufacturers and now what that is. Or to be fair, the club now in their...
Yeah, we'll own it.
We'll own it themselves, yeah.
Yeah, I think if we look back at some of those shirts from the late noughties and early teens, horrible. Yeah. Look at them now and be like, wow, how did that ever get through?
We kind of touched on this before from Gareth, but very quickly, he says, why does the Pro version have the better badge, but also the worse stripes being heat press versus stitched?
Yeah, so we talked about...
And that's subjective, isn't it, that you think these are better or worse, I suppose?
Yeah, so we talked about perceived value.
Yeah.
And so, put simply, it's on a player shirt, it's all about just stripping out weight. Yeah. You want it to be as light as possible and still do the job it needs to do. And so... for me, I can see value in those. It'd almost be a question like, well, why does a Formula One car cost £2 million when it hasn't even got air conditioning? It's a similar type of question where it's all about doing what's right for ultimately who's going to wear it and where they're going to wear it.
I mean, the badge is
beautiful.
Definitely better on the authentic.
And I think again, a lot of fans prefer, albeit as I said earlier, this is a woven applique. A lot of fans would prefer that to be a proper direct embroidery because they see that as being valuable.
Yeah.
I think when you know the effort that goes into designing, creating, developing, applying a badge like this, and to get it to look that nice, then to me that's clearly a step apart. If that was just this, like the woven one, quite flat and just a heat applied, almost I guess like the sponsor logo is, then you'd have a good argument to say, well, it's purely for performance. But I think Adidas have clearly shown that's not what they're about. It's performance first, but then what can you do to make it beautiful without compromising the function?
So I just had to answer the door, and while I was gone for a couple of minutes, Rob found a colours book. Do you want to talk us through this?
It's nice, I've got a green caterpillar and leaf. So this is a bit what it's like having a Pantone book.
This is not my reading comprehension, by the way.
Hungry caterpillar colours book, red, apple and strawberry. So it shows again there that you can have a couple of different types of red.
Any claret in this book?
There isn't, which is perhaps why brands in the past haven't been able to match properly if they've been using the Hungry caterpillar colour book.
And plum.
Yeah, well, one thing that stood out for me was that, as per our illustrious neighbours, the colour blue is denoted by a plum. So I thought that was quite apt. They're not listed underneath brown, though, sadly. But it's quite a useful guide. That.
So I'll just chuck this away.
Yeah, I look forward to Wilfred signing up at sparkdesignacademy.com to do our course.
Oh, clang. Right, back to the questions then. I'm going to combine two here from Anthony and Dave. Anthony, first of all, I'd be interested in the process of how the final kit is chosen. How many different options are drawn up? Are they physically produced? And then who makes the final choice? And is it simply, yes, that one, or no, I like that one, but with that one's collar, etc.? And Dave says, how much say do club owners or national federations have on the colours of the away or third kits?
So, good questions. And without kind of leading you down the full process of all of it, ultimately the sign-off is in the hands of the club or the federation, particularly when you're operating at Villa's level. I think, if you're a smaller club, perhaps if you were a club playing in League One or something like that, or perhaps a smaller federation, then you might have some say depending on the relationship, but the chances are you would get what you're given.
Okay.
With Villa, I would think that there's probably been, obviously, we've all seen that the template that Adidas have used with variations on it across all the teams. I would expect that there were different options presented to the club with different levels of detail in terms of the changing of colours within some of these insert panels. The collar might have had a solid option, or it could have come from the club as to, can we put the stripes in there? We'll never find any of that stuff out. That's the type of conversations that you have typically. You go in and present to the club, here's the shirt, here's what we're doing for the season, these are the performance benefits of it, this is how it's made, here's how we're constructing the badges, etc. So you sell them the dream. And then you present a few different options. Sometimes a couple of them would be quite far away from what anybody would want, just to help kind of lead the witness into how nice your preferred choice is. Back in my days of working with, I'm not going to say exactly who, but Premier League teams, there was a goalkeeper that was particularly cautious and conscious of his weight. And the one season we wanted to get him in something a little bit different. He'd always insisted in playing in either all black or all grey. We had something a little bit different, so the other options that we presented, and the marketing team at this club knew, what they needed to achieve on behalf of this player. So we presented a load of options that were, one was the one that we wanted, and the others were like pink, bright yellow. One had got horizontal stripes on it. So they basically had no choice. And it's interesting, when I've talked to a couple of former colleagues or international colleagues of this particular goalkeeper, they've always been able to guess who it was as well.
I'm just trying to think it could be.
So I'm not going to reveal, it's not for me to say. But
Have some shouts in the comments if you want to get involved with the guessing game.
Yeah, I think if you have a look through, bearing in mind I was designing, again, probably mid-noughties, I would say this was mid to late noughties.
I've got an idea in my head, but I won't say. We'll have that conversation off air instead.
Let's not be fat shaming anybody.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, so it's really all in the hands of the club ultimately. Sign off, but at some point there has to be a compromise if the clock's ticking.
Jen asks, why is the longevity of the kit so poor? For example, badges and labels peeling off, or badges with irregular stitching. Does it come back to just the fact that they take so long to make and the yearly churn of, right, we need another one now, we need a new one, we need 3 kits, we need a 4th special edition Champions League kit? That just is so relentless that it's hard to maintain a standard.
Yeah, it can be that. I mean, ultimately there's not really any excuse, to be honest, especially at the price that people are paying for these. As I mentioned before, in terms of applying the heat transfers, and that's obviously what Jen's talking about in terms of things peeling off. Then again, just having the temperature setting not quite right, or taking it off a second early, can make a real difference. So, following the right washing instructions is really, really important. That said, I did see a Villa shirt on social media the other day where I forget what it is it Aero Ready on the Replica?
Yeah, it's on the spot
had peeled off, and somebody's lad had worn it, I think once or twice. It hadn't been in the wash and it had come away already, which really there's no excuse for that. And I think what I would say is, if that does happen and you can in good faith look yourself in the mirror and say, well, I haven't washed it against the washing guidelines, whatever, I would expect to be able to take it back and get another one, because it's not acceptable in my eyes.
Villa Truth says, we're getting the Heat Ready Pro kits, which not all clubs are. Is it worth investing in compared to the other kits?
I would say it is. But it is, you've got to look at it as investing in it. If you're going to, as I said earlier in the conversation, if we're going to be looking at wearing a shirt and smashing it to bits every week, 5-a-side, wearing it to Sainsbury's, wearing it to other supermarkets are available, wearing it to 5-a-side, wearing it to the match, wearing it for a curry, you perhaps want the one that's a bit cheaper, a bit more robust, and you'll be a bit less sad about if anything happens to it. You perhaps wouldn't buy a Lamborghini to just drop the kids off at nursery. I would say that the authentic shirt is always better than the replica.
This is the Heat Ready thing, is a kind of that tiering system, isn't it, of clubs, that only the elite level clubs get this?
Yeah, well, so Heat Ready and Aero Ready, they're fabric technologies within Adidas. Right. And I don't know exactly what the criteria are to qualify for one over the other. I would expect it's how quick they dry, air permeability, all that sort of jazz. And so, it would essentially denote that it's a better quality of fabric, or makes it sound like the other one isn't good quality, but certainly a higher grade of material.
For those that have only listened to this, we've had in front of us the whole way through the Villa Home authentic shirt and the replica. If you've got to now combine everything we've talked about in terms of the technical production, the design, the material, the branding, the sponsor, the new badge, if you had to rate these 2 kits out of 10, first of all, are they different numbers? But what would you give these?
Wow, I think I'll probably do it in 2 ways. So first of all, if I was comparing them to each other, so if we were just looking at as a product and without taking price into account, then I would say the authentic version is far better for my money. Way better. I think if I was to rate the authentic out of 10 as an authentic shirt, and compared to the other shirts that I've looked at and reviewed over the years, I would give it probably a solid 8 out of 10. I think partly because it scores highly because it's a proper Villa shirt, but it also doesn't score a 10 because I think there's more exciting, unexpected details to come, which I think will then score higher. It's like, wow, wasn't expecting that. In terms of the replica, I would say as a replica shirt, I would probably score that as probably a 7.5 out of 10. So again, it's good. It's got a good mix of materials. The colour matching's great. Things that people perhaps might take for granted. I think for me, it's as with the authentic shirt, it's just lacking that little bit of little bit of pizzazz. If I think about kind of details on it, I'd expect the Adidas logo to be embroidered. I expected a woven badge. You know, the rib's really nice, but you know, it's the difference is that it goes all the way around rather than just being on the sides of the player shirt. So as replica shirts go, it's good quality, but I think there's still opportunity in the future for it to step up a gear and have a little bit more excitement to it in terms of design and details.
Right, Rob, we'll call this episode a day there. Thank you very much for coming to my house and doing this episode. I fully appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching or listening. If you've listened, I'd love to hear how you've assessed this episode compared to watching it, because I think this has obviously been a very visual thing, but hopefully you've enjoyed it nonetheless. Get involved in the comments section down on YouTube. You can follow all Rob's socials and various different avenues in the description down below as well. Rob, thank you for coming. Thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you on the next one.